Number 8. Salamat Mamage. Albanian drug lord Salamat Mamage likes to call himself the devil. While living in Great Britain in recent years, he ran a network that distributed millions of pounds worth of drugs throughout the United Kingdom. Staffed by underpaid illegal immigrants, the operation consisted of several factories where potent high-grade cannabis was grown. Mamage advertised his goods on social media. In 2021, a Daily Mail investigation revealed that he had offered to sell industrial quantities of marijuana to undercover reporters. The drug baron also bragged about kidnapping a rival dealer and cutting his fingers off. After the Daily Mail exposed its findings, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson demanded that authorities take action against Mamage's drug business. In the meantime, Mamage brazenly showed off the lifestyle that his ill-gotten proceeds were affording him. He also made a mockery of the investigative report by including clips of it in a rap video which featured scenes of him preparing to torture a rival. In the lyrics, he described himself as number one and a big one in this place. Finally, in November 2022, police raided Mamage's properties. They arrested him and his brother Dior, who worked as Salamat's right-hand man. The men pleaded guilty to commercially producing cannabis over a 2-year period. Mamage was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison, while Dior is still awaiting sentencing. Number 7. Colleen Campbell. Colleen Campbell enjoyed the lavish lifestyle that came with being the wife of a cocaine baron, which included luxury travel, expensive supercars, designer clothes and jewelry, and an upscale home in Greater Manchester with a gym and a bar. While probing the couple's finances as part of a years-long investigation, detectives discovered that Colleen's husband, Thomas Campbell, raked in 6-figure profits from his cocaine and money laundering operation, while Colleen worked part-time at a discount store. The couple separated in 2021 after Colleen caught Thomas having an affair. In July of 2022, Thomas was found tortured to death inside the couple's home. He had been stomped on, punched, stabbed, and doused with boiling water. Just days later, Colleen relayed details about his injuries that only someone involved in the crime would know to her late husband's mother. Colleen claimed she had gotten the information from a clairvoyant, but her mother-in-law suspected that there was another explanation and passed the details on to the police. Prosecutors accused Colleen and several co-conspirators of tracking Thomas's whereabouts and meticulously plotting to stage the murder as a burglary gone wrong. Colleen didn't participate directly in killing Thomas, but provided key information about his location and habits to her accomplices. According to authorities, 3 men ambushed Thomas, including his rival drug dealer and mistress's ex-boyfriend, John Belfield. Colleen was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 13 years in prison. She lost her home, which the government planned to sell as a way to recoup the 5-figure fine she was ordered to pay. John Belfield was arrested in South America on drug charges in early 2023 and is facing extradition to the UK to face a murder charge for Campbell's death. Accomplice Rhys Stephen was convicted of murder and sentenced to 37 years to life, while Stephen Cleworth received a 12-year sentence for manslaughter. Number 6. Brian Wilson. During the summer of 2020, a school teacher living in Louisville, Kentucky, was tricked into giving her Snapchat password to someone posing as a member of the app support team. The imposter, later identified as Louisville Metro Police Officer Brian Wilson, extracted a private video from the woman's account and threatened to blackmail her with it if she didn't send him more intimate content. Over the following month, Wilson repeatedly contacted the woman with harassing messages and threats to leak the video to her family, friends, boss, and colleagues. He actually sent the video to at least one person, and his behavior caused the victim to feel like she was being watched and to fear for her safety and job security. Wilson targeted multiple other women in a similar fashion. He identified and targeted victims using powerful software available to him through his job. Working with at least one co-conspirator, Wilson hacked at least 12 women's social media accounts and directly contacted at least 8 of them. He posted several of the women's photos online and bragged about his exploits. In addition to his internet crimes, Wilson and a fellow officer, Curtis Flynn, were accused of driving around in unmarked patrol cars while on duty and throwing large drinks at civilians on the sidewalk. The pair recorded the cruel stunts, sometimes with the help of fellow officers, and the videos were shared among members of the department. Wilson resigned from the police force in 2020 amid an investigation into his activities, but the stalking continued until late 2021, when the FBI got involved in the case. He ultimately pleaded guilty to one federal count of cyberstalking for the blackmailing scheme and one count conspiring to violate the civil rights for the drink-throwing crime spree, dubbed Slushygate. He was sentenced to 30 months in prison. Flynn was sentenced to 3 months in prison, followed by 3 months of probation. Number 5. Harry Brackpool. After appearing on law enforcement's most wanted list in Surrey, England for attacking his girlfriend several times in 2016, 24-year-old Harry Brackpool went on the run. He documented his travels throughout southern England on social media, capturing a police-themed photo at every opportunity. In one photo, Brackpool posed in front of a statue of a police officer. In another, he snapped a selfie in front of a yard containing a police-themed lawn ornament. Brackpool also took a picture of himself standing in front of a police cruiser. He labeled the images with taunting captions like, "Now the game begins," and "Catch me if you can." The fleeing fugitive also addressed his alleged crimes on Facebook, claiming that a charge he faced for making threats to kill his girlfriend stemmed from threats he made to kill his pet fish. But if Brackpool was hoping for supportive reactions, he was looking in the wrong place. Several of his friends and family members expressed their disapproval of his behavior in their comments. One woman, believed to be the wanted man's aunt, called Brackpool pathetic and said she was disgusted with him. She told her nephew that she didn't think he was funny and urged him to take his post down. Brackpool was captured after a month on the run and was booked on 3 counts of assault by beating, 1 count of causing actual bodily harm, and 1 count of causing fear or distress through harassment. Despite his young age, he already had a string of convictions on his record for domestic violence, aggravated vehicle theft, and battery and harassment. He had been jailed for harassing his girlfriend 2 years earlier, but she dropped a restraining order against him following his release. This time, the judge sentenced him to 32 months in prison. Number 4. Andrew Murray. Over a 6-year period starting in 2013, a Scottish man named Andrew Murray stalked and domestically abused at least 5 women. He controlled his victims' social media activity, banned them from interacting with men, threw things at them, destroyed their belongings, shoved them against walls, threatened them, and verbally abused them. One woman accused Murray of calling her fat and ugly, saying nobody else would ever want to date her, and picking her up by the throat and choke-slamming her. Another ex-girlfriend said that Murray forced her to share her location at all times, banned her from wearing makeup, and forbade her from engaging in hobbies that he had no interest in. The mistreatment took such a heavy toll on her mental health that she eventually quit her job. In 2017, Murray was sentenced to 21 months in prison for tormenting a young woman named Bethany Haynes and mocking the death of her father, who was beheaded by an ISIS terrorist in 2014. Murray challenged his conviction and his sentence was overturned, leaving him free to torment other women and emboldened by the fact that he had gotten away with his crimes against Bethany. Justice finally came in early 2022 when Murray was sentenced to 33 months in prison for his crimes against 4 women. The judge overseeing the cases commended the victims for coming forward and acknowledged that Murray had continued to blame his victims and refused to take responsibility for his wrongdoings. Number 3. Sam Walker. After failing to appear in court for breaching a driving ban in April 2018, 35-year-old British gangster Sam Walker documented his efforts to evade law enforcement on social media in a video he titled, "How to Get Out of UK When You're Wanted by Police." According to investigators, Walker flew from the UK to Belgium and from Belgium to Barcelona. He then hitchhiked to southern Spain, took a boat to Morocco, then drove south along the West African coast to Guinea, where he caught a ride on a cargo ship to Sierra Leone. From there, Walker chartered a plane to Dubai, took another flight to North Africa, traveled to Italy via speedboat, then traveled through Spain and Portugal before taking a helicopter to France, and then finally back to the UK. Walker would later claim that he was doing charity work during his travels, but his social media posts showed him visiting diamond mines and going out drinking with friends. Upon his return to northern England, he shared a video of himself smiling in front of a police headquarters in Cheshire. It was accompanied by the caption, "Catch me if you can." He also posted a photo of himself laughing inside a Hilton hotel room overlooking a police station in Merseyside. Walker, who has over 100 criminal convictions on his record, seemed pretty confident that the police wouldn't catch him. But by documenting his travels, he made himself a lot easier to find, and he wasn't back in Britain for very long before the cops caught up with him and arrested him. He has since landed himself in more trouble, and as of late 2022, he was serving a 15-month prison sentence for once again driving without a license, this time with more than 6.5 pounds of marijuana in the vehicle. During his time behind bars, Walker posted videos of himself and other inmates singing and holding talent contests inside the prison. The clips appear to be filmed with a contraband cell phone, despite a disclaimer on Walker's YouTube channel claiming that someone else managed his account. His videos went viral, but he was quickly banned from making money from his illegally filmed content. Number 2. Connor Ashton. Connor Ashton spent 4 years burglarizing and attacking women in Colchester, England, in a series of home invasions that left his victims terrified and traumatized. Inspired by American serial killer Richard Ramirez, better known as the Night Stalker, Ashton called himself the Stalking Ransacker and taunted the police with messages left behind on the walls of the homes he targeted. He marked some of his crime scenes with pentagrams, which investigators linked to his obsession with Ramirez. Ashton's crime spree began in December 2013. He began with standard burglaries. Most of the time, the victims were not even home. But Ashton became increasingly bold and aggressive over time as his crimes escalated into aggravated burglaries. During the summer of 2017, he bound at least 2 of his victims with zip ties and robbed them at knife point. One woman awoke to see the masked intruder standing over her bed. Ashton forced her to hand over her debit card and give him the PIN number, tied her wrists and ankles, and then fled the scene, leaving her bound. The serial burglar left behind very little forensic evidence, making his crimes difficult to solve. Investigators eventually connected the burglaries after noticing similarities between the crimes, including Ashton's tendency to throw food all over the place and rifle through victims' underwear drawers. His disturbing graffiti also helped law enforcement establish that the robberies were being committed by a serial burglar. Ashton was finally arrested after the buyer of a stolen laptop identified him as the person who sold it to them. While searching Ashton's computer following his arrest, investigators found an internet search for the original Night Stalker, further pointing toward his fascination with Richard Ramirez. In 2018, Ashton pleaded guilty to 6 counts of burglary and 2 counts of aggravated burglary. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, followed by 4 years of supervised release. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Jason Christopher Hughes. Before legally changing his name to Raymond Johnson, serial stalker Jason Christopher Hughes spent at least 2 decades stalking and harassing dozens of women online. By the time federal authorities finally charged him with stalking 2 women in 2017, there were entire websites dedicated to tracking his activities. One of the victims listed in the criminal allegations against Hughes was his childhood pen pal, who he first began corresponding with during the 1970s. The woman eventually ended their correspondence due to Hughes's increasingly threatening and controlling behavior. After trying repeatedly to obtain a restraining order with no success, she moved overseas. The continued harassment included threats against her family. A second victim, named Rachel, agreed to meet Hughes in person after corresponding online for several months in the early 2000s. During the visit, she determined that she wasn't interested in a continued relationship. Rachel stopped responding to Hughes online, but he continued to barrage her with emails, messages, and phone calls. He sent Rachel's intimate photos to her boss and co-workers, and she eventually lost her job. The victims received messages describing gruesome acts of mutilation, murder, and cannibalism, causing them to fear for their safety and their family's safety. After victimizing an unknown number of women and getting away with it for so many years, Hughes probably thought he could continue his campaign of torment unchecked. But the FBI eventually caught up with him, and he ended up pleading guilty to one count of making a threat to injure. In December 2021, he was sentenced to a year in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release.
10. Fed up orangutan attacks zoo visitor. In a bid to increase his social media popularity, wannabe influencer Hassan Al-Arifin jumped an enclosure fence at the Kasangkulim Zoo in Indonesia and approached an orangutan cage. He taunted the primate, who was quick to grab the 19-year-old by the arm. Arifin yanked his arm away, and the orangutan grabbed him by the shirt, then by the legs. Bystander footage showed Arifin being held against the cage in a nearly horizontal position. A witness alerted staff, who were on their lunch break at the time, and the employees managed to calm the orangutan down enough to rescue Arifin. He was kicked out of the zoo for the feeble-minded stunt, which had the added bonus of making him look bad on social media. Arifin was lucky to walk away from the encounter uninjured. As many commenters pointed out, orangutans are a lot stronger than humans, and the one that Arifin encountered could have ripped him to shreds if it wanted to. 9. Into the Grand Canyon. Out of the roughly 900 people who have died in the Grand Canyon, around 180 of them fell from cliffs. On average, 12 lives are lost at the park every year. Tragedy struck twice in less than a week in 2019, starting when a tourist from Hong Kong tripped and fell near an observation platform called the Skywalk while taking a photo. He plunged 1,000 feet to his death. There are signs at the site warning visitors not to get too close to the edge, and it's also common sense to keep a safe distance. But like any other popular tourist site, not all warnings go heeded, and there will always be people who take their chances by venturing too close to the edge. Just days later, a 67-year-old man fell 400 feet from a viewing area on the South Rim. It was the third death over an 8-day period, and the second falling death in the same amount of time. The victim fell in an undeveloped part of the park, according to authorities, who said that they were investigating but that both falling deaths were believed to be accidental. 8. Deadly jet blast. The Princess Juliana International Airport sits right next to Maho Beach on the Caribbean island country of Sint Maarten. It's famous for the planes that fly extremely low overhead as they land, and for the powerful blast of jet engines from just yards away as a plane revs up for takeoff. In fact, it's a tradition of sorts for visitors to cling to the fence separating the airport from the beach while standing in the direct path of the jet blast. Footage posted to YouTube typically shows people struggling to hold on to the fence as they fight the powerful gusts. But just because it's popular doesn't mean it's safe, and authorities strongly discourage tourists from doing it. The chain-link fence is lined with signs warning beachgoers of the dangers, and law enforcement occasionally patrols the area, especially at busy times. And although the government doesn't keep an official count of the injuries that occur from this unusual tourism rite of passage, it's known for a fact that people do get hurt. One viral video from 2012 showed a young girl losing her grip on the fence and being slammed headfirst into a concrete wall. Both she and her friend were blown backwards and became airborne, and they were lucky to survive with relatively minor injuries. The young woman who hit the wall was left with a deep gash in her head, while her friend broke her leg. In 2017, a 57-year-old woman from New Zealand became the first known person to die from the jet blast. She was standing at the fence along with several other people, but she couldn't hang on when the plane's engine powered up. The force of the gust sent her flying, and paramedics immediately rushed to the scene, but she was too injured to be saved. 7. Tourist charged by bull elk. Common sense dictates that when a person finds themselves in close proximity to a large wild animal, the smartest thing to do is to get far away from it, which is what most people did when they noticed a large bull elk with massive antlers marking his territory in Estes Park, Colorado, one day in 2022. Others made the unwise decision to surround the animal, which naturally caused him to become noticeably agitated. Instead of backing off, however, the crowd stayed uncomfortably close to the elk for at least 15 minutes before he charged at a tourist who was taking a photo. Some of the bystanders, who were smart enough to respect the bull's space, cheered the animal on when he finally decided to make it clear that he was fed up. Footage of the incident shows the photographer running as the elk chased after him. After the video went viral, park officials reminded the public to stay at least 75 feet away from elk at all times for their own safety. 6. Visitor falls into Mount Vesuvius. While approaching the 4,200-foot summit of Italy's Mount Vesuvius in 2022, a 23-year-old American tourist named Philip Carroll and his family bypassed a visitor turnstile and entered an area that's off-limits to tourists. While taking a selfie at the edge of the crater, he dropped his phone into it. Instead of doing the common sense thing and asking for help, Carroll lowered himself into the crater in an attempt to grab his phone. He lost his balance and fell several yards down, making it impossible for him to climb back out. A multi-agency rescue effort was launched, and Carroll was pulled to safety. He sustained some nasty cuts, scrapes, and open wounds, but it could have been worse. Paolo Capelli, who runs a base at the top of the volcano, told NBC News that if Carroll had gone much further, he would have plummeted nearly 1,000 feet into the middle of the crater. Authorities were less than pleased with the family for ignoring the numerous signs along the path they took, which repeatedly warned visitors not to enter. According to news sources, Carroll and his relatives were criminally charged in connection with the incident. 5. Belligerent butcher bird. Included among Australia's array of terrifying wildlife is a species called the butcher bird. Related to magpies, these 12 to 16-inch long hunters are equipped with a hooked bill that they use for catching reptiles, rats, and smaller birds. 25-year-old Amber Bitzer was hanging out in her backyard in Brisbane one day in 2020 when a butcher bird swooped in out of nowhere and struck her square in the forehead. The young woman's friend overheard her screaming and rushed outside to find blood gushing from her forehead. Amber had her wound patched up by a doctor, and while she was expected to recover physically, she was also left mentally scarred. She told 7 News that she was afraid to go into her backyard and that she no longer felt like it was her property. And, as it turned out, her fears weren't completely unfounded. When one of her roommates went outside to hang laundry on the clothesline, the butcher bird struck again. Luckily, the roommate was wearing a bike helmet and sunglasses to protect herself from getting hurt. The attacks happened during what's known as magpie swooping season, when the birds become much more territorial than usual, and unpleasant encounters with humans are much more likely to happen. By the time Amber and her roommates received the unwanted visitor in their backyard, 280 attacks have been reported across Australia so far that year. 4. Plunge into Mount St Helens. In 2008, 52-year-old John Slem became the first person to fall into the crater of Mount St Helens, which formed when the volcano erupted in 1980. That day, Slem, his son Jared, and his friend Rob Mays took their snowmobiles up to the volcano's rim and crawled onto an overhanging shelf of snow on their stomachs to look into the crater. The cornice partially collapsed, sending Slem roughly 200 feet down onto a snowbank. And Jared also began to fall in, but Rob grabbed him at the last second and pulled him to safety. As Slem tried to climb his way back out, the snow beneath him collapsed. This time, he slid an estimated 1,500 feet down, riding on an avalanche of snow and debris. Miraculously, Slem survived and could be seen up and walking around. Using their walkie-talkie, Rob and Jared radioed to some nearby campers and asked them to call for help. While Slem suffered from some injuries, he was in good enough condition to get into a helicopter that descended into the crater. Authorities were just as shocked as everyone else that he survived, which they didn't think would ever happen if someone fell in. 3. Swept out to sea. To prevent visitors from getting too close to the water and being swept out to sea, Canadian authorities built a viewing platform at Peggy's Cove in Nova Scotia. It was unveiled in 2021 amid a tragic history of large waves pulling people off the boulders that line the shoreline and dragging them to their deaths. Once in a while, emergency responders manage to plug someone from the violent waters. But in many, if not most cases, a victim either disappears or is found dead. In addition to building the new lookout, officials placed more signs in dangerous areas, warning curious visitors to keep their distance. Unfortunately, there's only so much they can do to stop people from putting their lives at risk. In 2022, two brothers in their 20s were knocked off the rocks by a large wave during high tide. The search for them continued into the night. One of the men survived while the other was found dead. The survivor, Zarin Barot, told CBC News that the tide rose quickly and became too strong for either he or his brother Harshil to fight against. They held on to each other for as long as they could, but became separated. The last thing Barot remembers is falling unconscious and waking up in the intensive care unit the next day. Some locals have blamed tourists for the high death rate at Peggy's Cove, pointing out how visitors are unfamiliar with the volatile and unpredictable nature of the water. It's true that the site is a major tourist attraction, and that perhaps ignorance plays a role despite the 40 or so signs marking dangerous areas. But that doesn't make it any less tragic when someone dies or disappears. After losing his brother, Barot said he wants more safety measures implemented at Peggy's Cove. He recalled how there was nothing to grab onto once the rising water started to pull him away, and his friends who were standing nearby couldn't find anything to throw to the brothers and pull them in with. Barot also claimed that it was too dark to see the warning signs that are supposed to caution visitors from getting too close to the water. His family is calling on officials to install better lighting and to have rescue tubes and other emergency devices readily available for when people fall in. In a CBC interview, Paul Dion from the Life-Saving Society of Nova Scotia said that the organization is currently looking into ways that they can better prevent drowning tragedies. 2. Selfie with a walrus. During a visit to a wildlife park in China's Liaoning province in 2016, businessman Jia Lijun took plenty of photos and videos to share with his friends and family on social media. What started out as a fun day took a sudden tragic turn when he went to take a selfie in front of an enclosure housing a 1.6-ton walrus. As Jia began to snap photos holding the camera up to include the walrus behind him, the creature grabbed him from behind and dragged him into the water. The walrus proceeded to submerge Jia and swing his body around, while a zookeeper, Duan, rushed to the exhibit and tried to rescue him. When Duan entered the pool, the walrus also dragged him. Both men were held underwater until they drowned. The majority of social media users blamed the zoo rather than the walrus. Members of the public were quick to criticize the park for not putting a more protective barrier up around the perimeter of the exhibit, which many believe would have prevented the tragedy. In a statement, staff members speculated that the walrus didn't mean to attack the zookeeper, but that the gesture was playful. The zoo ultimately took responsibility for Jia's death and compensated his family. 1. Over the edge. During a sunrise walk along some cliffs in Moss Beach, California in 2022, a man began to feel the cliff edge crumbling beneath his feet. The next thing he knew, he was falling. He miraculously survived the 100-foot drop, but was stranded for a few hours until someone overheard him yelling for help. Less than a half hour after arriving at the scene, firefighters pulled the man to safety. Harrowing footage of the rescue shows around a dozen firefighters pulling a rope while the man is hoisted up the cliff alongside an officer. He appeared to be wobbly, but in relatively good shape considering the fact that many people die from much shorter falls. Authorities declined to comment on his condition, but used the incident as an opportunity to remind the public to avoid cliff edges because they're unstable. Chances are the man was walking far closer to the edge than he should have been, which he'll probably never do again after the terrifying close call he experienced firsthand.
Thanks for watching. Have you ever gotten caught doing something that you were absolutely sure you would get away with? Tell us about it in the comments below and remember to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.